Hello everyone, welcome to my channel English Literature with Sumi. So today we are going to discuss about the Anglo Norman period or the Middle English period starting from 1066 to 1350. So today I will be discussing about the up till the poetry section and the prose section and the literary developments of the period I will be discussing in my next video. So let's get started. The Anglo-Norman or the Middle English period in English literature, it ranges from 1066 to 1350. Now this Middle English period, if we separate it from the Anglo-Norman period, we can see that it can be divided into three parts, that is before Chaucer from 1066 to 1350, Age of Chaucer from 1350 to 1400, Age of Revival 1400 to 1550. Now today we will be discussing about the age before Chaucer, that is from 1066 to 1350. So the name Norman is a softened form of Northmen who came originally from Scandinavia. They came plundering along the French coast and conquered the whole northern country. Now when these Northmen, they came from Scandinavia, they conquered almost the whole northern country, and as a result the Norse elements of the conqueror, that is the Northmen, disappeared as they intermarried with the native Franks and adopted French ideals and spoke the French language. So they completely forgot their own ideals and they started taking the French ideals as their own ideals and also spoke the French language. Now the union of Norse, that is Northmen, and French blood gave rise to a race having the best qualities of both races. As a result, they became the strongest race among the people living at that time, and the Norman French people brought with them three things when they appeared in Anglo-Saxon England. These three things are a lively Celtic disposition, a vigorous Latin civilization, and a Romance language. Now remember one thing, Romance language here means a language which is full of adventure, full of lively things and full of lively adventurous deeds on the part of the people. So actually, the actual event that began the transition from Old English to Middle English was the Norman conquest of 1066. So when we talk about Anglo-Norman period, we usually speak about the year 1066 because it was at that point, from that point of time onwards, that we can take it as the Anglo-Norman period. So at the Battle of Hastings, which took place in 1066, William the Conqueror, who was the Duke of Normandy, he defeated the Saxon king and became the master of England. Master or king is the same person. He became, as a result, the king of England. Now these Normans, they brought with them the ideals of a Romance civilization, the national idea of a centralized government, a wealth of a new language and literature. All these things were not present when they came to England. So they were the first who brought with them these things. The Normans used to speak in a rural dialect of French with considerable Germanic influences, which is called Norman French, different from the standard French version of Paris at that time. Thus, Anglo-Norman French became the language of king and nobility of England for more than 300 years. But the lower class people continued to speak English. This was a lower form of English, and the nobilities, they considered this a lower language. So these two languages, they developed in parallel. Only they gradually merged when the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans began to intermarry. So it is the mixture of actually Old English and Anglo-Norman French that we today speak of as Middle English. So now we know that Old English and Anglo-Norman French together, when they intermingle with each other, they are known as Middle English. Now, after knowing how the Middle English came into being, let us see what are the literary ideals of the Romans. Every race had some literature in them, had some quality of literary ideals in them. So, let us see what were the literary ideals of the Normans. So, the themes in their works were mostly religious or based on love or chivalry or history, the deeds of Alexander or the misdeeds of a monk. There was more of the Gaul. A Gaul is one who stops every traveler and compel him to tell a story than of the Norsemen in the conquerors, and far more fancy than of thought or feeling in their literature. By this I meant to say is that the Norman people, they were mostly storytellers. They liked to listen to stories of adventures, and they also liked to hear stories from others. And they mostly like to hear stories about fancy than of wisdom and intellectual things. So they were a race who were big in stature, big in fighting, or brave in fighting battles, but they were also people who used to like to listen to stories full of imagination and fancy. So now we come to the literary features of the age. Age means Anglo Norman period. Literature was in the hands of the clergy and nobles, and the common people could not read, because the parchments on which the literature was available, they were very scarce and it was expensive as well. So the common people, they could not afford it. So in many ways the period is one of transition and of experiment. As we have already seen in the Anglo-Saxon period, oral tradition preserved the poetic models of the past. So oral tradition was also prevalent in the Anglo-Norman period. Anonymous nature of writing was also strongly evidenced in the literature of the period, because the writers, they did not sign their names in what they wrote. Much of the surviving work of the period is poetry, which is used for various fields like history, divinity and science. Now when we hear the terms history, divinity and science today, we usually think of it as prose parts or prose literature, but earlier in the Anglo-Norman period, they were written in verse form. Now we come to the poetry part. Now poetry in the Anglo-Norman period can be divided into three parts. First were the Chronicles, secondly the religious and didactic poetry, and thirdly the romances. I will be discussing one by one with example. First, let us come to the Chronicles. Chronicles were distinguished by their use of story, which appear incredible because of their inventiveness and vivacity of style. So in the Chronicles, the writers used to invent new ideas, and there was also variety of style used. The first example of Chronicles is Layman's Brut. It was written in 1205 by Layman, who was a monk, and it tells the history of Britain from the landing of Brutus in Britain to the death of Cadwallader. So it is basically a history of England or Britain. The chief source of this work is Roman de Brut of Wes. Okay. The next example is Robert of Gloucester. Robert of Gloucester, he is known from his rhyming chronicle, and in his work we could see that he drew largely on the work of Geoffrey of Monmouth, William of Malmesbury, who were chroniclers, and also he depended on other chroniclers as well. Now for him, that is for Robert of Gloucester, Arthur is the hero of his work, and he shows a true love of his country. That is, Robert shows a true love of his country in his work. Now there is no doubt that his work is lively and sincere, but it is not outstanding in any way. There is no doubt that he wrote it in a very sincere way, and he has shown love of his country in his work, but we cannot consider his work as outstanding or of excellent merit. Next we have the example of Robert Manning of Brunn. His story of England was completed between 3 and 4 o'clock on the afternoon of Friday, May 25, 1338. So you may laugh at the specificity of this fact, because he was one such person who was very accurate in what he speaks. So the story begins with Noah and the deluge and ends with the death of Edward I. His other works include Handling Sinmay 1303. Now the common factor or the most important thing about the chroniclers is that they all deals with history, and the name itself, that is Chronicles, they mean that the history of the period. So these were some of the examples of chronicles written at that time. Now we come to the second type of poetry, that is the religious and didactic poetry. Then from the name itself you can guess that these were poems dealing with religious elements or didacticism. The Ormulum, written by a certain Orm in 1200 in Northeast Midland dialect. Now this Ormulum poem, it consists of a large number of religious homilies. Homilies were religious scriptures basically. Then we have the Owl and the Nightingale. Its word authorship is doubtful, as I have already told that writers do not used to sign their works. So, and it was probably written in the early part of the 13th century. This poem is about an argument, basically between nightingale representing the joys of life and owl representing wisdom, and the whole poem is a debate going on between them regarding which one is better, whether enjoyment is better or wisdom is better. Other examples of religious and didactic poetry include the Origin to Our Lady, Genesis and Exodus, the Bestiary, the Moral Ode and Proverbs of Alfred. This is one example. Then the second is the Cursor Mundi. The third is the Prick of Conscience. And we have also alliterative poems like Pearl, Purity, Patience, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Now the romances, or the metrical or the medieval romances, were the most important literature of the Anglo-Norman period. Now romances, they can be divided into cycles or matters. We have the matter of French romances, matter of Rome, matter of Britain. Now the three great ideals found in the romances are love, chivalry and religion. These romances were usually a long rambling poem or series of poems treating of love or knightly adventure or both. I have already told you that the Normans were lover of adventures and adventurous deeds. So its hero, I am telling you the subject matter of the poem, its hero is a knight. Its characters are fair ladies in distress, warriors in armors, giants, dragons, enchanters, etc. And the emphases of the romances are invariably on love, religion and duty as defined by chivalry. They are also, and for this reason particularly, because of chivalry, these romances were also known as chivalric romances. Now first of all, let us come to the matter of France. Now matter of France romances, it deals largely with the exploits of Charlemagne, who is a knight, and his peers, the chief of which is Chanson de Roland, and in that it celebrates the heroism of Roland, who is a knight, in his last fight against the Saracens at Roncesvalles. This Chanson de Roland, it was originally called Chanson de Geste, indicating that these were short songs celebrating the deeds of well-known heroes in their adventures. And gradually this Chanson de Geste, it converted into Chanson de Roland, because later the short poems were combined together and converted into an epic form. So later it became Chanson de Roland. Then we have the matter of Rome. Now this matter of Rome romances or cycle, it consisted of tales from Greek and Roman sources. Basically it deals with the deeds of Alexander. We all know about Alexander the Great, who was a favorite hero at that time, and the Siege of Troy. Now, examples of this type of romances are King Alexander is of average merit, as is also the destruction of Troy. So, they cannot be considered as having excellent merit or outstanding merit, but they are of average merit. Let us come to the last of the romances, that is the Matter of Britain. So, this Matter of Britain romances, it is the most interesting of the romances because they deals with the exploits of Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. It is the richest storehouse of romance that our literature has ever found. So, although there are other romance cycles, but the Arthurian romances or the Matter of Britain romances, they were liked by most people, and they were mostly about adventures undertaken by the knights of the Arthur and his Round Table. So, there were many cycles of Arthurian romances, chief of which were Gawain. Now, Gawain is a knight, Lancelot is a knight, Merlin is a knight, then Quest of Holy Grail is one, the Death of Arthur is another. But the most interesting of the Arthurian romances are those of the Gawain cycle, and one outstanding story is of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is worth reading. Now, the meter and style of the romances. The variety, the meter is of various kinds, and the style is also great. But one important thing that I forgot to speak is about the supernatural element. Usually, we do not find dragons loitering around with the knights in their palaces or in their kingdom, but these romances, they deal with supernatural elements like magicians, like dragons, like enchanters. So usually it raises fantasy and imagination in the minds of the reader as well as the one who is writing the romances. So the authorship is not known actually of these romances, but they were the most important part of the Anglo Norman period, and their importance is even known today till this day. So that's all for today. I will be discussing about the prose section and the literary developments of the period in part 2 of the Anglo Norman period. So if you are new to my channel, do not forget to subscribe to my channel English Literature with Sumi, and don't forget to like, comment and share this video with your friends.